Madam President, when I last briefed the Council on Yemen, I shared detail on the gravity of the crisis, and we discussed the growing constraints in our humanitarian work. Since then, both have got worse. And now severe funding cuts have been a body blow to our work to save lives. It is, of course, for individual countries to decide how to spend their money. But it is the pace at which so much vital work has been shut down that adds to the perfect storm that we face. I have asked our humanitarian coordinators in Yemen and elsewhere to report by the end of next week on where we will need to cut back most dramatically and the implications of the tough choices we are making on which lives not to save. I won't repeat the list of humanitarian numbers in my last briefing. It is more incumbent upon this council to focus on how we use your collective weight to deal with the causes of those numbers. So my three asks of you haven't changed. Firstly, please back our effort to get access to those civilians at greatest risk. Second, please ensure we have the funding to save as many lives as we can. And third, a request for your public and private pressure to release humanitarians who have been arbitrarily detained while working to deliver your instructions. Madam President, as Special Envoy Grunberg underlined, we're approaching International Women's Day on 8th of March. After decades of progress on women's rights, too slow, but still progress, we are now seeing globally a sustained and deliberate pushback against equality. We must recognize this danger and we must respond. So I want to focus today on the humanitarian situation faced by women and girls in Yemen and the impact of funding cuts on their lives. And I'm afraid, Madam President, that it is a grim picture. The crisis has a disproportionate and devastating impact on women and girls. They've suffered from systematic discrimination, exclusion for decades. 2021, Yemen ranked second to last in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index. In 2023, it ranked second to last in the Georgetown Institute Women, Peace and Security Index. And there is no sign of progress for them. I don't know whether the numbers really convey the challenge, but here are some to think about. 9.6 million women and girls in Yemen are in severe need of life-saving humanitarian assistance, facing hunger, violence, and a collapsing healthcare system. 1.3 million pregnant women and new mothers are malnourished, putting their own health at risk and exposing their children to disease and long-term issues. Yemen's maternal mortality rate is the highest in the Middle East, more than 10 times that of Saudi Arabia or Oman. More than 6 million women and girls face heightened risk of abuse and exploitation. 1.5 million girls in Yemen remain out of school, denying them the right to education and preventing them from breaking the cycles of discrimination and violence facing them. Nearly 1/3 of all girls in Yemen are married before the age of 18, stripping them of their childhood, education, and future. As your funding for Yemen evaporates, the numbers in my next briefing will be worse. But what does that mean for women and girls who are the humans behind those numbers? More will die. More will be left with no choice but to adopt dangerous coping mechanisms, survival sex, begging, coerced prostitution, human trafficking, and selling their children. And yet, Madam President, despite bearing the greatest burdens of this war, of displacement, of deprivation, women remain on the front lines of survival and recovery, raising kids, pushing day to day for a better future, rebuilding communities, pushing for peace, often with little recognition or support. These are acts of quiet heroism, dignity, and resilience, and we will do all we can to support them with the dwindling resources that we are given. This includes a doctor in Aden, one of only 2 women fistula surgeons in the country, performing 30 surgeries a month, who received UN-funded training to specialize in this critical field. It includes a midwife, the first to work in Hadramaut Governorate, and whose work and the work of her colleagues has been critical to the decline in maternal mortality. And it includes the widowed mother in Al Hudaydah Governorate, who cares for her 3 children, one with a disability and one in need of ongoing medical treatment, and for whom the support of humanitarian partners is essential to her ability to do so. Just 3 examples among thousands that I hope resonate through the noise, distraction, and the attacks on humanitarian work. I'm not here to defend programs and spreadsheets and institutions, but people. I also want to recognize the women and girls who are on the front line of the humanitarian response. They lead half of the NGOs in our humanitarian country team, and 40% of the Yemen Humanitarian Fund goes to women-led organizations, the vast majority of them local NGOs. These funds ensured that pregnant and breastfeeding women got safe and dignified healthcare, that survivors of violence accessed life-saving services, and that communal spaces and sanitation facilities are safe for women to use. Madam President, as the humanitarian response in Yemen faces severe funding cuts, these programs are all at risk, and along with them, vital lifelines for women and girls across the country. Funding suspensions have already forced 22 safe spaces to close, denying services and support to over 11,000 women and girls in high-risk areas. Survivors of gender-based violence no longer have access to life-saving healthcare, psychosocial support, and legal aid. And child protection programs have been halted, leading to even greater risk of child labor, recruitment into armed groups, and child marriage. These are choices that we make when we cut funding. Madam President, on a separate issue, earlier this week, the US designation of the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization was completed. From the UN humanitarian perspective, our job remains the same, to save lives. We need to continue that work and ensure civilians in Yemen have access to essential food and medicine, whether through commercial or humanitarian channels. If this is not possible, it would have serious impact on communities already on the precipice of disaster. Women and children will, I am afraid, again bear the brunt. Madam President, this is a tough time to be a humanitarian, but it is much tougher for the people we serve. And right now, it is getting even tougher for the women and girls of Yemen. The decisions you take will determine whether it gets worse. Thank you.
I thank Ms.